Hello and welcome once again to the Fair Game podcast, We Love You Football. I'm Graham Miller, and in this episode we're highlighting the situation at Morecambe Football Club. As you know, Fair Game's all about creating a fairer, more sustainable football landscape for all clubs and fans. And Morecambe, the Shrimps, well, they find themselves a threatened species right now. The combination of financial instability, ownership issues, a threat of relegation to the National League, plus management changes, well, it all means the club's future is in doubt. The owners, Bond Group Investments, are struggling to finalise a sale to Punjab Warriors, leading to frustration among supporters who've already taken to the streets in protest. The Warriors are still to complete the EFL's owners and directors test, and since the club's been for sale, they've reported a £1.2 million loss in their last accounts. In recent times, Morecambe's also suffered a points deduction for failing to declare money owed to HMRC and had a transfer embargo imposed due to a VAT issue. They've also twice been late in paying wages to staff and players. So what can be done? Well, before I introduce you to our panel to talk it through, let me bring in Niall Cooper, the CEO of Fair Game, for a news update.
Thanks, Graham. So, a quick update. We've finally polished off the agenda for our conference, which this year is taking place on the 28th and 29th of May. Tickets are available now on our website, www.fairgameuk.org. And today, I'm delighted to announce our first keynote speaker. It is the Independent's Miguel Delaney. Miguel's recent book, State of Play, explores many of the big issues our conference will be covering, including things like sports washing and, of course, financial flow. And it's that latter issue that will be the centre of today's podcast.
So let me introduce you to our panel for our conversation. With me I have Lizzie Collins, the MP for Morecambe and Lunesdale, James Wakefield, a director of Morecambe Football Club, Dave Salmon, Morecambe's football commentator for Beyond Radio, and Niall Cooper, still with us, the CEO of Fair Game, for the Fair Game View. Now, James Wakefield, as a member of the Morecambe board, let me start with you. Just how bad are things?
It's difficult to summarise it because we've been in this situation for such a long time that at times it can feel almost like it's normal, which isn't, I don't think, very healthy. I've been a director now for 5 years, and for almost half of that, we have been in this very long sale process, which has caused all manner of knock-on effects, and some of which have been very negative, some of which we just clambered over and got on with. Things are relatively stable at the moment. We managed to navigate the financial challenges that faced us last year, and we managed to get through the transfer window and bring some players in. I think that Derek and the first team squad are doing a fantastic job on the pitch. They're a lot more competitive than our current league position suggests. And we played top of the league on Saturday, created more chances than them, frankly, and they were happy to say that to us too. So, on the pitch, things actually are looking up, and off it, we're trying to run everything as best we can and trying to improve everything as best we can and trying to do things as well as we possibly can. And we've got a really good general management team behind me doing that. But there is no getting away from the fact that this incredibly long and incredibly frustrating sales process prevents really any manner of any form of long-term thinking and planning, and it prevents us being able to do more than just deal with the immediate challenges that face us, which is pretty depressing. And I also absolutely understand why it causes immense frustration amongst fans. So I think I'd say that day to day it's stable and it's better than it has been, but we are in a spiral of never being able to look further into the future than the next couple of weeks.
I remember filming your new ground back in 2010 when it was being put together, when the future looked bright and rosy. What's been happening since that period? How have we got to this point? You've made it a very positive answer there, but clearly things aren't what they might be.
Well, I suppose, if you go back to that point, the point that the stadium was being built, it was 2009, 2010. At that point, we were owned, or we were led by a guy called Peter McGuigan, who owned the club for a very long time. And he, I suppose, one of his biggest achievements was to own the club when it became a Football League member for the first time in 2007, and then a new stadium was built. And then I think the next sort of 4 or 5 years, or the next sort of 8 or 9 years, got more difficult. The ownership changed then basically when Peter ran out of money, and Bond Group came in at that point. And initially, it was a continuation of the same situation with relatively low crowds, always everybody's favourites for relegation, and it was pretty tough. And we were getting 1,800, 1,900 fans for a Saturday, and less than that on a Tuesday night. Then the management change. The first team manager was changed. Derek Adams came in. We made some changes on the board, and we tried to set our stall out and come up with a plan. And actually, we did achieve promotion to the League One for this first time in the club's history. We did it on one of the 2 lowest budgets in the whole of the Football League, let alone League Two. We spent 2 seasons in League One. We doubled crowds, and even now, thanks to fans' loyalty, we've managed to maintain a much higher crowds, even though the last couple of years have been difficult. And we improved everything off the pitch and on it. So everything really did improve for a couple of years. And then Bond Group put the club up for sale. I've almost forgotten when now, but somebody can remind me. It's such a long time ago. And we've been in that sale process for coming up to 2.5 years. So it's been a tale of some positivity back 2007 to 2011, 12, 13, some tough years, a couple of really good years, and some real progress on and off the pitch. And then now this sale process, which has lasted forever.
Lizzie Collins is the local MP. What would it mean to your constituents, and indeed the whole area of Morecambe, if the club were to fold, if it were to go to the wall?
It would be absolutely devastating. It's a core part of our town and a core part of our identity. And I think it's hard to overstate the importance of football clubs to the local community. It's not just the game on a Saturday, it's everything connected with it. It's the community trust. It's that place for people to go and to be together. And quite often people who might not otherwise have anywhere else to go are coming together as one, are having this fantastic experience of watching the team that they love, and to lose it would be absolutely devastating.
We've got the football governance bill coming through, hopefully like a knight in shining armour. Do you worry that bill might be a little bit too late for Morecambe?
I do worry about that. The measures in the bill are fantastic. And I really want to see it get through Parliament as quickly as possible. It's currently being, I won't say held up in the Lords, but there's a lot going on in the Lords with the football governance bill. And I do worry. And what I really want to see is just to get this sale finalised, get us able to look to the future, like James said.
Mm. Dave Salmon, you cover Morecambe for Beyond Radio. From what we've just heard from James, it doesn't seem to be affecting the players on the pitch, which is extraordinary.
I think I've never seen a Morecambe team with such spirit and heart and determination as the current squad. I think, as James rightly said, the results on the pitch, and we're currently in the relegation zone. We're 2 points from safety with 13 games of the season to play. So it's still very much in our hands whether we go up or go down this season. But it's just that heart and that spirit that you have to, I suppose, if you are a member of the playing squad, you have to almost separate yourself. And it's virtually impossible to do that, because if you are a first team footballer at Morecambe, you're that ingrained with everything to do with the whole Morecambe Football Club operation that it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to just focus on matters on the field. And it would be very easy for the squad to be distracted. But following the team home and away this season, I can honestly say that isn't the case. Thankfully, it's not the case. The problem on the pitch comes purely from financial situations behind the scenes. It's all down to budgets. If your budget's very low, the pool of players that you can attract to play in your first team in the first place are very limited. We obviously had a lot of issues last summer as well. We were under a transfer, more of a registration embargo until July, so we were very late in getting a squad together. and we had to get players out of non-league and all that kind of thing. So to even be where we are now, just a couple of points outside the relegation from safety, with nearly a third of the season to go, it's quite remarkable, really.
I think the positivity you see on the pitch is also matched by the fans. So, nothing can keep a good Morecambian down. We went to Chelsea recently and it's the best day out I've ever had. And I think the Chelsea fans were somewhat baffled by the spirits and the singing and the chanting from the Morecambe end. We were small in numbers, but we were mighty in voice. And I think the brilliant thing about Morecambe, both on and off the pitch, is that you can't keep us down.
Dave, do the players talk to you about affairs off the pitch?
They try to keep it for matters on the pitch, Graham, to be honest. And I think that is the right thing to do, because if you're a first team player, you have no influence at all as to the financial matters or the running of the football club. You're employed as a professional football player to actually perform on the field of play on a Saturday and a Tuesday evening. So I think that is the right thing to do. Some of the players will be more attuned to what's going on than others. There's no question about that, but I think as far as possible, Derek Adams, our manager, and Danny Granger, our assistant, tries to shield the team and the squad as much as possible away from that, and I think that is the right thing to do.
Niall, in general terms, can all of this be avoided if and when the Football Governance Bill is passed into law, do you think?
I think that there are real rooms for improvement here through a football governance bill. There are two real significant ones, one of which is trying to make it easier for that transition between owners, and try and speed that up. And I think there's elements within the bill that are looking towards doing that, and it probably needs a little bit of tweaking, but there's something that we're talking with a few of Lizzie's colleagues, and probably I've mentioned it to Lizzie, I'm sure, in previous bits, about trying to tighten that up just to make it better. And then second is the financial flow within the game, because the pressure is always on to try and compete on the pitch as much as possible. But when the gaps in the league are so big that it makes it really difficult to be able to look at a club which has got such that spirit. I mean, I lived in the area for 5 years, so I kind of know what that is. I mean, admittedly, it was in Lancaster and not in Morecambe, so probably, there's a bit of old rivalry between the two areas. But it's only a couple of miles apart, and occasional times I fall
It's
asleep.
all one area.
There's
There's not a point where one ends and the other one starts. And if you're like me, you grew up in the area, then I see Lancaster and Morecambe as all being one thing. That may not be what everybody else wants to hear on this call, but I grew up going out in Morecambe on a Saturday night, Lancaster on a Friday. I grew up cycling down the prom, by going shopping in town. I think that's probably true for most, isn't it?
Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. I mean, I still remember going to risking my life and on life and limb on Frontierland when that was open. So, that sort of stuff. Anyway, sorry, Graham, I digress massively. Yeah, for me, it's that financial bit that's going to make a big difference, because I look at the spirit, I know the town, I know what it means to the community, and if we can start shifting that financial dial to help clubs at the lower end who are so embedded in the community, that's where I can see a real big difference. I talk about this a lot, and Graham's heard me say these numbers, but it's £3.2 billion is the amount that comes into the game. And, the amount that trickles down to League One or League Two or the National League is minuscule. I mean, it's of that 3.2 billion, 5% is split between the clubs who don't get the parachute payments or the Premier League stuff, between 138 clubs. Morecambe's one of those, and that's tiny when you consider that 8% of that money stays in the Premier League. And I loved watching you guys at Chelsea. And I was aware of the kind of noise, aware of the atmosphere, and for me, it just says a whole lot about how the game should be. But I'd love to see that gap narrowed. When you've kind of got a player that Chelsea are bringing on that's probably worth £100 million, and James, I don't know what Morecambe could do with £100 million, but I'm sure there's quite a lot. That's the difference that's ridiculous, because the amount that Morecambe means, the football club means to the town, is huge, and I just would love to see that better equity being spread down the pyramid, and the decisions on that going to a regulator that kind of says, right, well, let's make sure the clubs who are really embedded get their chance to shine.
The reality now is that Morecambe are just one of several clubs who find themselves in very similar positions.
Yeah, it's true. There are lots of clubs out there that are living, I mean, the amount of clubs that live hand to mouth and have to deal with the stress and the kind of difficulties that being a football club owner and director. And I've been a director of a football club, so I'm aware of how difficult it can be. You know, but a regulator can look at trying to make sure that governance is more equal, make sure that when you get into the frustration that James and Morecambe fans are experiencing now, that's speeded up. And when you look at that kind of financial balancing, encouraging and rewarding well-run clubs, and I think we have this real opportunity to change the way football operates. And the Football Governance Bill represents a fantastic opportunity to do that. I don't want to see Morecambe going through that kind of heartache and the strains. I mean, God, I'm astonished that James has got all his hair and it's not grey. I mean, mine's grey. I've just spent a couple of years as director of a football club, so I don't know how James has managed it with 5. So that's kind of where I'm at. Dave, I don't know. For those who can't see, and this is audio only, Dave doesn't seem to have much hair left, so perhaps he's worrying quite a lot about it as well.
James now is talking about speeding things up. Morecambe's problems, as you've been saying, have been rumbling on for about 3 years or so. Why do you think is taking so long to sort this thing out?
Ultimately, any sale comes down to a willing seller and a willing buyer. I do believe that our owner wants to sell, but there's one thing to sell at any price, and there's one thing to sell at a particular price, and I think that's probably where some of the issue is. But again, I can't comment on that with any form of knowledge, or I'm speculating when I say that. I think that maybe earlier in the process there was hope rather than belief, confidence, credible thinking going on, and I think that potentially has improved a little bit. But ultimately, the issue is that there's been umpteen clubs, smaller and larger than us, sold during the time that we've been for sale. And there've been clubs that I would make a strong case as having less commercial viability, less potential for growth, less potential for progression that have been successfully purchased. And the only people who can answer why we remain for sale for so long are the owners. I think for me, it goes back to something that was said earlier. The Football Governance Bill, it is too late for Morecambe, and even if it were to suddenly speed through the Lords, and even if those trying to slow it down were to step out of the way, we will need to play the game as it's currently structured, rather than hope that there's going to be a change in the structure of the game that's going to save us. So my interest in fair game, my interest in the Football Governance Bill, is not from a Morecambe perspective, it's just from a football perspective. At the moment, we have a structure which encourages clubs to spend more than they can afford to spend, which means that the league tables from top to bottom are ordered by owners who are most willing to lose money to owners who are least willing or least able to lose money. And a handful, the number of clubs in the game that make a profit outside the top 15 or so it's literally can be counted on one hand in terms of consistently. We made a profit a couple of years ago, well done us, and then the following 2 years we've made the same amount that we made profit in that 1 year in loss, and that's the reality of running a football club in the way that things are currently structured. And I'm coming at this not from the point of view of being a particularly socialist person. I believe in things being fair. I believe in a level playing field, but I do believe in the free market. So I don't think that the game needs to be, completely torn apart, but just a slightly more equitable sharing of the funds, a tearing up of parachute payments, a tackling of those who have into the favour of to the slightly greater favour of the have-nots, and an understanding of what football clubs mean to community. Could mean that you would still have the most competitive Premier League, you still have the best top league in the world, you would still have a game which is fundamentally structured on capitalist lines, but you wouldn't have a Morecambe or a Bury or a Macclesfield or a Bolton or a Derby all of the time. There's always 3 or 4 or 5 clubs in our position, and there have been and there will be as long as they don't change the structure of the game. So yeah, it's too late for Morecambe. We've got to play the game as it's currently played, which is enormously frustrating because I want to run a sustainable club. I don't want to be looking for a millionaire to buy us and to lose 2 million quid every year. But whilst the game remains as it is at the moment, no club in League One or League Two can contemplate anything other than trying to find a wealthy person who's willing to lose money, which is nonsense. You know, we all have business interests, but it's absolute nonsense that almost every football club in the land runs at a loss.
You make a very strong argument, but we all know what the Premier League like. They're like the computer. The Premier League say no, don't they? That's the wealth they have, the power they have. How do you break into that? How do you break that down?
Only government can do it. Only an independent regulator. This is the only multi-billion pound or euro industry in the whole of Europe that's not regulated. It requires a body which genuinely has the legal power to tell the PFA, the Premier League, the FA, the EFL what to do, and to tackle the inequity in the game, and to explain to people in simple terms that if they don't do what they're told, then the power will be removed from them and somebody else will take charge. What we have at the moment is a situation where a lot of self-interested bodies and individuals are acting in self-interest, and the only way you tackle that is with regulation, and that's true in any industry.
If there wasn't a problem in the football pyramid, we wouldn't need regulation, but there is a problem, and the Football Governance Bill recognises that problem, but also recognises the value of football beyond a commercial competition. Because football is so much more than that. Football to communities like Morecambe is not just about a small number of people making a huge amount of money. What it is about the community, it's about the town, it's about identity. And this is, the first recognition from a government of essentially the heritage value and the cultural value of football. Now, the regulator has proposed is fairly light touch, is, a regulator of last resort in some areas. And if you look at other countries, for example, the French regulator gets involved in, points deductions and stuff like that. And we're not proposing that at all. So it's a very reasonable response to what is a significant problem. And it recognises that value of football beyond pounds, shillings and pence, and that can be difficult for vested interests whose interest is the bottom line, but that is why we need that regulation.
What are you hearing? What are you feeling in the tea rooms at Westminster? Are they on your side, or do you feel there's a huge battle still to be won?
So it's a government bill and we have a majority, so we will get there on it. There has been some stuff in the Lords which has come partly from an ideological objection to regulation, and partly, I think, just because they're miffed about a few things, and so they're playing silly beggars. But in general, certainly all the Labour MPs are fully behind it. It was interesting to see recently, though, that Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, has come out against it, which is really peculiar because this was originally a Conservative bill. Tracy Crouch, huge props to Tracy Crouch for the work that she did on this bill. She did a fantastic job. And yes, we have changed a few things and strengthened a few things, but it's not changed that massively, and there's a risk that it gets pulled into kind of the silly party politics, objecting just because it's the opposition. But overall, there's huge amounts of support for this bill, and ultimately it will go through.
As it is now, or do you fear it might be watered down or changed with this opposition you've just mentioned?
I'm not worried about it being watered down. And I think certainly Niall would argue that there are opportunities to strengthen it. And I'm very interested in looking at that. But the government are absolutely committed to this. But obviously we have a process where bills go through a huge amount of scrutiny, both in the Commons and the Lords. And I think that's a really positive thing, because the bill will be scrutinised literally line by line in both houses, and that can only be a good thing.
Dave, you've told us, and James has told us, how the players are responding, the fans are responding. if you don't manage to get out of that relegation zone, what do you think it would mean to go down to the National League? I mean, can the club survive that?
Personally, I think it would be absolutely catastrophic. We fought really, really hard for many years to get to the point where we are. We are proudly members of the Football League, have been for what's going to be 19 seasons if we were to survive, and next season will be our 20th season in the Football League. And for a club the size of Morecambe historically, that's a huge deal. And we've spent many, many years to try and establish ourselves as a football club, and even today we are referred to as little old Morecambe. And oh, haven't you done well to survive for another season, and all that kind of stuff. And for many years we were perennial strugglers. The club was well run, but on the field, staying in League Two or whatever it was called in that particular season was the be-all and end-all of our on-the-pitch ambitions. And we managed to do that year after year after year. We then, of course, had a couple of really good years in League One, almost against the odds, got promoted in the COVID season and had two unbelievable seasons in League One. We probably should have stayed up at the end of our second season. We only got relegated on the final day. If we'd have won our last game of the season, we'd have stayed up. And from there, it's been a bit of a catalogue of disaster since then, really. If we are going into the National League, personally, and I say this as a fan as well as a journalist and a commentator, under current circumstances, it would be very difficult to see Morecambe being able to bounce back anytime in the near future. You look at Carlisle United, they're bottom of the League Two table at the moment. They have very wealthy American owners. If they go into the National League, they would be favourites to bounce back at the very first time of asking, and they would throw a lot of financial resource to try and make that happen. We haven't got that luxury. We, as James alluded to, we are going hand to mouth, week to week, month to month, to just purely survive. It would be catastrophic for the club. It would be catastrophic for the local community. And it's not just the playing side of it, Graham. It's every single aspect. It's our academy. It's the unbelievable work we do with the community, with the veterans, and there's many veterans who live in the Lancaster and Morecambe area. It's all of the outreach work we do within local schools and everything else that goes along with that. There's people's livelihoods at stake. It's as simple as that. There are people who've worked at the club for many, many years. There are people who've been there not so long, but they are in their dream jobs, whatever that might be. And when you get a rogue owner who seemingly is driving the club into the ground, that, for me personally, when I see the knock-on effect that could potentially have on some very, very good people who have been involved with Morecambe Football Club for a long time in whatever capacity, that's what breaks my heart the most, is the fact that we would really struggle to come back, I think, and that's why we need to do all we can to stay up. Fortunately, we're in a position where it is pretty much in our own hands to stay up, but a long way to go on the field. But relegation, I think, would be absolutely catastrophic.
Now, we hear that word catastrophic a lot. It's always money, money, money. Nearly 60% of the top 92 clubs are technically insolvent. I mean, this is no way to run any business, never mind football, is it?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. So we've got to look at a fundamental restructuring of how the game runs, and that's really where that financial flow and kind of encouraging well-run clubs, kind of embedding good governance, but also providing the support so that all of that stuff that comes in means that James's directors and the club there have the ability to make sure that they can implement it without it being a burden. Because we need to have those changes in. We need to change that culture to help the club survive. I think the other issue is that when you look at the financial flow again, and the amount of money that actually goes into clubs in the National League is so significantly different than what it is into League Two. So there's a big jump there, and that's a huge burden, and that needs to be leveled out. I also think that in the National League, the rules and regulations are how they're implemented significantly different than they are in League Two in the EFL. So you need to look at trying to address that, and that's where a regulator has a real good opportunity to help. Because if I don't want to see Morecambe fall into the National League and then instantly have so many more problems than they've already got now, you want to be in a situation where if a club gets relegated, it isn't a catastrophe, it isn't a disaster because of the financial knock-on effects. And that's the bit that needs to be addressed, and that needs to be across the whole of the pyramid. You need to close those gaps. Nobody wants to get relegated, but at the end of every season, clubs do get relegated, and you don't want Dave to have to be using the word catastrophe for what has been really remarkable journey that Morecambe have been on. I remember speaking to James in the when I think we were probably playing each other in League One at the time in the boardroom when I was a director at AFC Wimbledon. And James was quite happily telling me that Morecambe had never got relegated at that time, which is a phenomenal achievement to think how many, decades and decades having never got relegated. That's a phenomenal thing. And it's something to be real badge of honour. And I don't want to see Morecambe get relegated again. And that for me is where you need to look at trying to level out that playing field, make it a fairer opportunity for all clubs. And also, sadly, James and Dave and Lizzie, that if you do go down, making it that word catastrophe not be part of it. And that's where football needs to look at it. AFC Wimbledon got relegated relatively recently, and it was really hard. I was on the board when it happened, and God, the amount of stick I got then. But I'm aware of it, and we kind of need to remove that a bit from the game, and we need to want clubs to feel that being sustainable is actually a really important place to be.
Well, playing devil's advocate for a moment, using that word sustainable, can we sustain 92 football clubs in the country?
Yeah, we can. We literally set out a plan to become a sustainable football club, and quite correctly, quite a few fans and individuals have scoffed at that at the time and also since. But we massively increased our off the field revenues. We did double the fan base in 2 seasons, which I've never heard of another club doing. We did suddenly find a way of conjuring up transfer revenue, mainly through the fantastic work that the first team manager was doing, but also through some really good work by the academy and by people off the pitch and negotiating deals. And so suddenly we went from a club that was losing money to a club that made more than £1 million in a season, which was pretty remarkable in that one season. But in that same period, wage inflation for football players has been to the tune of somewhere 50, 60, 70%. So all of the gains that we made have been gobbled up in player salaries. And I'm not sure about anybody else, but the rest of our staff salaries haven't gone up by that much. Mine hasn't gone up by that much. Yours hasn't gone up by that much. It's just footballers. And I'm not anti-football. I love footballers. I love ours in particular. But it's not possible as long as there's rampant wage inflation, which is driven by the structure of the game as it is at the moment. But if you change that and don't change it so much that you ruin the wonderful brand of the Premier League, then yeah, you can have a sustainable pyramid. You absolutely can.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. And that wage inflation has to be tackled, and we have to be honest about where it's coming from. And I, as someone who, let's be honest, I didn't actually really watch football before, previously. I'm not a long-standing football fan. I'm on a really sharp learning curve. But I do feel like surely no one's worth that much, no one can be actually worth however many hundreds of thousands of pounds a week. I mean that's just a bit silly, isn't it? Isn't that a bit silly? And so I think we really do need to tackle that, because the effect it has on the whole pyramid is so devastating and prevents the rest of the pyramid from being sustainable. And that's not taking away the fantastic stuff that's happened in the Premier League. That's not taking away from the competition and from the economic benefit of it. But I think we've got to get a bit realistic and say that at some point it's got to stop.
What is often forgotten is the impact that a local community club has financially in its area and what it brings to a community. And I think also, just as a hub, I mean, the reason why Morecambe have grown is because you've become a hub. You always were, but you don't grow unless you become a hub of a community. And what it means to your local businesses, what it means to having a decent academy, the kind of pride it brings, all of that sort of stuff is so positive. And that's a bit where I think the Premier League sometimes forgets about the power that the rest of the pyramid has in supporting the game. And that's the bit, it's like you don't kind of build a house and then knock out the foundations. And that's basically what the pyramid is. it's the foundations, and what you should be looking is strengthening those foundations. If you get more people interested in football on a lower league level, that's more talent coming through. That's more people paying interest in the game and loving the game. Most fans are priced out of the Premier League anyway. This is your entry point. This is how you fall in love with the game, by going to Morecambe, by being there 24/7, experiencing what it's like, experience those moments at Chelsea, strengthen that up, and you actually strengthen the whole of the game. And I think that's the bit where you need to think. That's why an independent regulator is so important, because it's that holistic view of going, what strengthens the whole of the game. And it's clubs like Morecambe that strengthen the whole of the game. And that's where I think you can get a bit of naivety at the top end to not realise what that means in Lizzie's constituency.
The economics that apply to lots of other businesses also apply to football clubs. So actually, smaller local football clubs, the money stays local. It is more beneficial to communities like mine to have the smaller and more local clubs and get that economic impact, because that money stays local. And you see that across lots of different economic spheres. Bigger isn't necessarily better in terms of the local economy.
I don't like the word catastrophe. Catastrophes to me applies to thousands of people dying in a natural disaster or war. When bullets are flying, that's a catastrophe. We don't have a God-given right to stay in the league because we've got a good story and we're called the Shrimps, and we've always fought against adversity. And what we're talking about when we talk about the regulation and fair game and levelling the playing field is all clubs, not one. But the other reason I don't like the word catastrophe is because if the worst were to happen, we would find a way, and we would probably outperform an awful lot of other clubs, because that's what we've done year on year on year on year on year. Last year we went through all of the ownership uncertainty, and at one point we looked like we were having a really decent chance of breaking into the playoffs, and all the other teams we were competing were spending 3-4 times as much as we were. And in the same season there were only 3 community awards available for the whole of League Two, and we won 2 of them. And we did that without any money. We just did it through good people volunteering, people giving the time, because they know what it means to the town and the community. So you can compete, because there are an awful lot of terribly run organisations in football. And it makes me smile that to this day that's true. I thought that when I got involved 5 years ago, and I still think that today. But it would be challenging. There's no question at all about that. And having watched the club rise during my whole life, it would, I don't really want to contemplate what it would mean if we were to find ourselves in a different league next season. But I think the other thing I'll say, and it goes back to what Lizzie and what Niall was saying, is the game really is sustainable now. Because when I was a kid, Morecambe were getting 600 fans on a Saturday. There was no media coverage. You had to wait for the Lancaster Guardian to be published or the Morecambe Visit to be published on the weekend before you knew what the result had been on the Tuesday night. If you hadn't been there and you didn't know somebody. There was no shop that really anything. There was like a little shed at the back of one of the stands where you might get a pencil or a shirt if you were lucky. There was no analysis. There was no data. But now what you get when you're a Morecambe fan or a Wimbledon fan or a Barrow fan or anybody, you get actually a similar experience to that which you got being a Premier League fan back in the 90s. You get access to all of this stuff, but the difference is you don't pay through the nose for it. You can do it, and the money stays in your own community. The shirts cost half. The pie, the pie chips and peas are not 15, 20 quid, and the whole thing is accessible. And you get the same experience that you got being an Everton or a Man United fan in the 90s. So it is absolutely sustainable, but not whilst the whole game is encouraging people to spend more than they can afford to spend. And not whilst it's basically a casino that you're locked into and you're forced to stay in and you're forced to gamble. That's what's got to change.
Well, on that point, I was surprised to hear you say that wage inflation has caused a problem. How do you control that at Morecambe's level, that the players' wages are just going up and up and up?
You can't, as long as the Premier League and the structure that sits at the moment is as it is. Then the guys at the top are getting paid ever more, which means that the guys in the Championship are getting paid ever more, which means League One, League Two, and it just goes the whole pyramid. The way that's just inflation. It gets sucked up from the very top. And when we were promoted in 2021, we did it on one of the smallest budgets in the league. But in the 4 years since, our budget needs to be 50, 60, 70% higher to still be within touching distance of the clubs ahead of us. Niall referenced another local club that are spending an awful lot more than we are. They're not doing any better, which is, again, probably goes back to the point I was making a couple of seconds ago. But if your competitors are spending ever more, then it's economics. You either have to try and spend with them, or you have to do things even better than you used to do them. And at some point, that breaks.
Dave, James doesn't like that word catastrophic, but in your heart of hearts, will the club still be here in 12 months?
It's impossible to say, Graham. I think James is absolutely right. We always find a way. Historically, we've always found a way. But when you hear some of the things that our current owner says, I mean, to be honest, communication and public communication isn't really his strong point. I'm sure James would say that private communication is not particularly a strong point for large periods of time either. But whilst there is this hand to mouth, there is this week to week, this month to month, are we going to be able to pay the wages next month? We can't set a budget for the next season because we don't know what the ownership situation is. Whilst there is all that uncertainty, you cannot say for 100% what is going to be Morecambe Football Club and how that is going to look and how it's going to feel in 12 months' time. Yes, if we got relegated, we would almost certainly find a way to be competitive on and off the pitch, and that's what we have always done. It would be handy if we could stay up, and we'll do everything we possibly can to stay up. But whilst there's this uncertainty, and whilst there is the owners who can swing the lead, if you would like to call it that, and they can behave the way that they behave and the way that Morecambe Football Club is being owned at the moment, until that changes, until there's a mechanism in place for that to change and to change, really change, not just there to be a figurehead of an independent regulator that's paid lots of money, 6-figure salary, and he goes to games and all that. That's wonderful. The light touch, as Lizzie says. We need real change, because if we don't get that real change, we are going to be, as James rightly said, we're going to be stuck at the bottom of that pyramid, ever fighting a battle to stay even at the bottom of that pyramid. And it's already an uphill task as it is. So to answer the question of will we still be here in 12 months, I would say we will. But what the club will look like at that point, it's really, really difficult to say at the moment.
James?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think first and foremost, we're doing everything we can to stay in the league. We've got the best manager, certainly in League One and League Two, in my opinion, and he has worked wonders with the budget that he's got, and he will, I'm sure, do so again. So I think we'll be in League Two next season. But as a responsible board, we will obviously plan for all eventualities. I think when any club goes down, fundamentally, whether it's a catastrophe or not depends on who the owner is, and it's that simple. If you go down and you've got an owner with deep pockets, it's not a catastrophe at all. If you go down and your owner suddenly finds themselves up against a wall, then yeah, it's a catastrophe. So it's the same for the clubs at the bottom of every league. Whether it's a catastrophe depends on your owner, and that comes back to that point that I made earlier, which is that the league tables are ordered by which owners are willing to lose the most money below the Premier League.
Lizzie, the onus is on you and your colleagues. You've got to get it right. Last chance saloon and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a huge responsibility. I mean, all governance is obviously a huge responsibility, but the football governance bill feels really personal for me. It feels really personal for our community. And I think we've got a duty to get this right and to get this through. Yeah, because it really matters.
It matters, Niall. You've called it last chance saloon, haven't you?
For me, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, right? This is a chance to really fix where we are with the game, to really look at trying to make the best we can to make sure that it is more optimistic. And I think the wage inflation things that people have talked about is one of the big issues in the game. And we've looked at several different ways of trying to address that over the years. And that needs to be really rigorously brought into control. Because and it is powered by what's happening in the Premier League. And we need to look at trying to make sure that it's fair. I mean, my club is one of the lowest spenders in the same league that Morecambe are in. So I'm fully aware of that. I remember seeing the budget sheets and thinking, oh, it's amazing that we've managed to add a little bit to our budget for this year. And yet you then look at it and you get all the data and you realise, well, you've added a little bit, but unfortunately all the other clubs around you have added an extra million or $500,000. And at League Two level, that makes a massive, massive difference. But if you think about that $500,000 or $1 million, and you think about how much money is actually in the top end of the game, that's frankly peanuts. And so we need to look at how you rebalance that and make sure that the wage inflation doesn't go out of control at all levels. It is, but ultimately, Graham, it is fixable. It is actually, we are actually on the cusp of something very significant that means clubs like Morecambe thrive and are sustainable. That's what we need to aim for. And there are 168 professional football clubs, semi-professional, going down to National League North and South, that are the hearts of all of their communities. And every single one of them can be sustainable and can thrive. That is not some sort of airy-fairy dream. That is actually a reality. And it is in the hands of our legislation right now. You know, we could see come June, around June, that we have a bill that becomes an act that makes that dream a reality. And that's how close we are. And I think that is an amazing opportunity, and we cannot be distracted by some of the self-interest at the very top end of the game that look after themselves and don't start casting their eyes around and realizing what all these fantastic community clubs are and what they can be.
Well, that's a good positive point to end on. That's all we have time for in this episode. My thanks to the panel. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the Fair Game podcast. It's available on all the usual channels. I'm Graham Miller. The producer is Ian Beach. And until the next edition of We Love You Football, it's goodbye for now.
Fair Game represents 34 men's professional football clubs, all united with a common aim of delivering a fairer future for football. We want to see a game where every fan can put on their club shirt, proud in everything it stands for, and safe in the knowledge that their club will be there for the long haul. We work with the nation's leading experts to develop realistic solutions to the game's problems, and then lobby the government and the authorities to try and adopt them. We are a volunteer-run organisation, and if you want to help Fair Game or donate, please check out our website www.fairgameuk.org.